Hey folks, Gwe. My name's Ed Trevors. Thank you for joining us for morning prayer. Thank you for joining me for this reflection. Today I am preaching from the Gospel of St. John, the 6th chapter, beginning at the first verse. Here's what it says. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain, sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat?" He said this to test Philip, for he knew himself what he was going to do. Philip answered him, though, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. You know how the story continues. Through a miracle, Jesus feeds thousands of people with a few bread, a few pieces of fish. I'm not going to talk about the miracle aspect of this today. There's lots to be said about it. There's lots of ideas as to how he could have pulled it off. No, I want to talk about Philip's answer. You see, Philip, he's been with Jesus for a little while. He's seen Jesus do all kinds of big, amazing things. He's seen healing. He's seen people get up who can't walk. He's seen people see who have never seen. He's heard people speak who have never spoken. He's seen people hear the birds and the chatter of their friends and the cries of their family who have never heard a word, never heard a sound. Philip's been there for the miracles. He's been there to see Jesus take care of the sick. As this gospel says, the crowd has gathered around because they heard of Jesus' care for the sick. So when Jesus says, where are we going to get food to feed all these people? We got to feed all these people. Where are we going to get the food for this? Philip says, what? 6 months' wages wouldn't feed all these people. How could we possibly feed them? 6 months' wages wouldn't. We don't have that kind of money. At no point in Jesus' ministry did he ever rely on the ways of the world to do the things that he was doing. At no point in Jesus' ministry did he ever do something that was, physically explainable. How do you put dirt in your hands, spit in your hands, and give somebody eyes? That's not physically possible. It's not physically possible to make somebody be able to walk simply by telling them to get up and walk. Jesus was doing the physically impossible for a long time, and yet when he asked Philip how they were going to feed all these people, Philip fell back into his comfortable place of what is and is not physically possible. How dare he? How dare he fall into, after seeing all the things that he saw, how dare he fall back into that place of the physical world and what is and is not possible and what should and should not be able to be done and what we can and cannot do according to the physical nature of our lives. I'm being a little harsh on Philip here because the truth is we all do it. We see stories like this and we think, oh, the miracle. Set the miracle aside for a second. Let's recognize that when Jesus comes into our lives, he comes into our lives by way of a relationship. It's a great relationship. He comes into our lives and begins a transformation process within us all. But it's an internal process. It's a spiritual process. It's an emotional process. What Jesus does in our lives is not based on earthly laws or earthly rules or earthly ways. It's based on heavenly ways. He works in us heavenly powers. So when we encounter His call in our life, Oftentimes we will drop into that, this is possible and that's possible and this isn't possible and that isn't possible. And who are we to say that? Because if Jesus is willing to do that kind of work in our lives spiritually and emotionally, why would we believe that the work he calls us to do in the world will be done simply with our physical abilities? It isn't. The work he calls us to do is also spiritual and emotional. Yes, there may be a physical aspect of it, but generally speaking, we don't work for Jesus in order to achieve something physical. No, Jesus, the work he calls us to do is not merely about the physical. It's about the spiritual. And if it's about the spiritual, why do we believe that something must be physically possible for us to achieve what Jesus wants us to achieve? I know I may sound like I'm blathering on here, but the truth is, Jesus tells us to do something. It's because it is possible. When Jesus tells us to love our neighbor, it is possible. When Jesus tells us to bring our community together, it is possible. When Jesus tells us to give of ourselves to the world, it is possible. When Jesus tells us to share his message of love in the world, it is possible. There is nothing impossible when it comes to Jesus. None of what Jesus asks us to do will ever be seen as impossible for those of us who follow Christ. And yet, so often, when the moment comes, we can't do that. Oh no, we're not capable of doing that. That's not something that we're able to do. That's not something that we're equipped to do. That's not something we're comfortable doing. That's not something physically we don't have the money, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources. If Jesus asked you to do it, it's because you have what it takes to do it. If Jesus has asked you to do it, you have the spiritual power, the emotional power. You have the heavenly power to do it. Because the work Jesus asks us to do, it transcends the physical. Nothing is impossible where he's concerned. Nothing is impossible where Jesus is concerned. Nothing is impossible where God is concerned. Jesus calls us forward not to do the impossible. Jesus calls us forward to do the possible. The mission that Christ has put into our lives is possible. It is absolutely doable. We are completely capable. We just have to be willing to try. We have to be willing to offer ourselves to it. We have to be willing to take that leap of faith. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that when our moment comes and we hear God's voice calling us forward into mission, we'll remember the stories of the loaves and the fishes. We'll remember the healings. We'll remember all the miracles of Jesus Christ. We'll remember that in him, through him, with him, we can change the world. We can make this world a better place. We can make the lives of those around us better. Amen. Nemoptis.